Hello, it's Seb, and I know it's quite bold of me to disappear for about a month or so and then come back with quite a long video about a book that I think most people haven't ever heard of. But please indulge me just this once, and I'll try to keep it shorter for the next ones. But this needs to be talked about. As for my absence, in that month or so since my last video, I have lived in more places than I can count on one hand, let's say. So it's just been a little bit difficult to find that stability for YouTube videos, but here we are, hopefully able to get back to a bit more of a regular programming. We'll see. But anyway, let's get on with our discussion of The Black Spider by Jeremias Gotthelf, translated by H.M. Waidson. This is a morbid little folktale wrapped up in a slim novella written by a Swiss pastor in, I think, the mid-1800s. Sort of an appropriate title and cover, I think, for the jungly setting I find myself in now. The story is basically that it's like kind of around the time of the Crusades, so sort of medieval-ish period in Switzerland, and there's a kind of cruel, tyrannical landlord, and he's got his peasants, and he is forcing them to move some trees. He's already overworking them, but now he's forcing them to move some trees from one place to another place, just so he can have like a kind of shaded walkway, and that is driven them to their wits' end. It's something they can't do. They're going to starve, they're going to die, they're at their lowest point. And then a mysterious huntsman appears, wearing green with a red feather in his cap, and he makes them an offer. He can actually use his people to move the trees and let them off the hook, and all he asks in return is something quite belonging to the morbid folktale category, let's say. Almost like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a gothic book as well, and I'll leave it at that for now. I'm going to go into the plot way more later, like deeply into it later, but for now I just want to like kind of have the opening bit of the video, something for people who might want to actually read the book. There's something about writers who use the novelistic form to and all that the novelistic form can do, like beautiful language, interesting sentences and structures, and like the ability to capture all these incongruous elements and just make them work in between two covers. There's something about using that to tell folk tales, which are like kind of basically oral storytelling, and like kind of try and recreate that sense of someone telling you a story. It just really works for me. It's just something I really love in literature, and lots of writers do it really well. I'm thinking like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Nikolai Gogol, and my own dearly beloved Kleist, Heinrich von Kleist, who I happen to be reading at the moment, but leave that aside for now. So The Black Spider clearly falls into that tradition, and that makes it a pleasure to read for me. One thing that distinguishes it, sometimes in better ways and sometimes in worse ways, is the sermon. It uses the sermon also like as a another way of telling a story. A sermon is like an oratory technique, right, as well as a manner of storytelling, and that kind of didactic, moralizing Christian voice becomes stronger, especially in the second half, the more you get into it. And I know what you're thinking, or what some of you are thinking, which is what I would be thinking, and like something like that would very often put me off a book entirely. And there were some bits in it where some of the sexism kind of grates on you, and there's some kind of ideas about authority. Just some of the worst things about traditionalism just slapped me in the face a few times as I was reading this. But I would say overall, hear me out, I think it added to it. I think this made it an interesting book, because while there is some of the preachy religious stuff in there, it's all kind of told in that comforting, like there's an old man who is relating the story, and it kind of in the character's voice. Like it kind of reminded me of like my Peruvian grandmother and the way she would tell stories, often with like a moral, and that's why you should always brush your teeth or whatever. It's like there's something kind of comfortable about that tone, and like the sense that it's not too serious. There's like some really camp and hilarious like religious moments in this as well, which maybe we'll get into later. But yeah, although there are some preachy moments which are off-putting, it's doing this sort of grappling and wrestling with some of the themes of Christianity that I find personally really fascinating. And it's told in this really creepy gothic format, which just makes the whole thing a lot more fun. Some of the themes in this and the way it's told actually reminded me a lot of another Gothic book I've read by a man of the cloth, Charles Maturin, who wrote Melmoth the Wanderer, which is a proper chunky Gothic novel. And he also set up the story of a kind of a bargain with the devil, and the idea of like, what does it profit a man to gain the world but lose his soul, and like and that's kind of like the theme of the book, and it's really long, and I remember I enjoyed it a lot. I felt like this kind of did a similar thing in much less time, and like maybe, I don't know, was a bit more fascinating in the way that it got at some of the core questions. I just want to know what was happening in the 1800s, which had all these priests like writing, horror novels. Something was going on there, I think. But like there does seem to be a sort of like a connection between Christianity and Gothic horror, which is goes back a long way. And yeah, speaking of like Gothic and horror, that was something that really surprised me about this book, is that it is more of a horror novel than a Gothic novel, I think. A lot of the kind of the things to do with Gothic novels, like, castles and chains and moonlight and I don't know, were absent. But it goes pretty grotesque places actually with the horror when the horror does come. There were some proper David Cronenberg body horror things which really surprised me, given how old this is. So that's something maybe to think about going into it. If you're not that into spiders, then maybe give this one a miss, I guess. Or and rather, if you have like a phobia or something, then be warned. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the plot in a bit more detail, because I want to lead you through my reading experience of the book, which isn't something I normally do, but this one just I need to talk about what happened in this book, because it's one of those ones where part of the pleasure of reading, maybe the main pleasure of reading, is not exactly knowing what's going to happen, and like the kind of the twists and the turns, and the unexpectedness of the way things play out. So yeah, if you want to experience that, then this is the end of the video for you. You probably want to stop now and go find the book. But if, as I imagine, a lot of you are not that interested in reading the book, but you want to know what happens, or you don't care about the spoilers, you want to hear first of all a little bit about the plot before you make up your mind, then keep listening. And to be honest, I've already kind of spoiled it a little bit, just a little bit, because the whole folktale thing that I said at the beginning is not actually how the book starts at all, which was the first surprise for me at the beginning. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Just like bear with me, okay? So it opens with these kind of idyllic pastoral paragraphs explaining the beautiful sun rising and the birds singing and they're making their nests, and here's a little Swiss house and their servants are making the cheese and the grandfather is cutting the bread. Or no, I don't know, he's overseeing it. The grandmother was cutting the bread, of course. But anyway, it's all like idyllic and pastoral and beautiful, and to the point that like it would be a little dull if it weren't for the fact that there's tiny little moments of uneasiness, tiny little like kind of hints that you might even miss if you maybe didn't know that this is called the Black Spider. So maybe it's not going to be some like beautiful story about hills all the time, right? Eventually it turns out that we are at the scene of a christening. It is the morning of a christening, and there's these guests, and there's the godmother and the godfather, and everybody's there, and they're going to have breakfast. At first it's quite humorous and charming, the way that they're all waiting for someone to eat, and we're going to be late and the priest won't like it if we're late, and then they start saying, oh no, we must go, oh no, you must eat, and oh, I couldn't possibly, oh no, but are you insulting us by not eating our food? Oh very well, it just goes on like this for ages, and these people are insufferable. And then I don't know if it's that the Swiss diet is kind of limited, or if Gotthelf was just not very good at writing descriptions of food. But it's basically like, there were huge balls of cheese on the table, and then in between the cheeses there were Bernese cakes, and then in front of the Bernese cakes there were smaller cheeses, and next to those there were more Bernese cakes, and it's like these people are just eating cheese and cake as far as I can see, so it's no wonder they get full quickly. Finally they leave the house, and they're going to the christening, and then what happens now is kind of interesting, because there's these, again, little touches of uneasiness around, but in this case it's around the godmother's character. Like, it seems that like her face is a bit pale or something like that, and then we move on to something else, and it could just be a description of her having a pale face, but we're not sure. And then eventually we zoom into her mind and we find out that she is freaking out because she forgot the baby's name. No, she didn't forget. They never told her the baby's name, and the tradition is that she can't ask the name, I think. So she doesn't know what to do, and there's this actually great tension building up, like what's going to happen, and she's just panicking, and we get up to the christening and then it's fine, the priest remembers. But like the kind of the zoom in from this kind of pastoral scene to the anxiety of this woman and like the not remembering the name thing, and then zoom out again and everyone's laughing and having a good time. I don't know, it's just written in a really good way. It was just good writing, I thought, and it made me like invested in this group and in these characters, having these kind of like mini tensions and mini stories in what seems like a sort of like period piece, middle class drama thing that's going on, right? Not at all what I signed up for when I picked up this book, but like it's great. So the christening is over, they go back to the house, and then guess what? It's time to eat more. So they're waiting for the food, the servants are eating first, and then while they're waiting, no, maybe they eat and then they go away and then they eat again. I don't know, there's so much eating in the beginning pages, it's kind of ridiculous. But while they're waiting for some more food to be prepared, they ask a question about a black post. There's a strange, ugly black post in the house, and they ask, "What's with that post? Your house is so pretty," so they say to the grandfather. "But like that one post is pretty ugly, if you don't mind us saying so. So why don't you just get rid of it?" And then someone else says, "I've heard there's a story behind that post, and now is the perfect time to tell it." And so the grandfather, first of all, he doesn't want to say it, but then they pressure him basically into saying it. Says like, "Okay, I'll tell you the story." And then there's a little break, and he starts talking, and I kind of like just put down the book in shock at this point, because I'm like, wait a minute, we're on page 24, and that was a framing device, right? That was all a framing device. I have never in my whole life been so invested and immersed in a framing device. I've never felt kind of sad to realize I'm in a framing device, because that means that these characters that I'm starting to get interested in, and like this world that I'm starting to get totally immersed in, is not actually the book. It's not. It's just the outside bit of the book. So that was impressive to begin with. The most detailed, immersive frame that I've ever read in any novel in my whole life. Okay, so great opening so far, and it's only about to get better. This page 24 is where it all kicks off. The grandfather begins by saying, "When I look at that black post, it makes me think of the history of this valley." And then he starts talking about the history of the valley. We're not going to hear about the black post for a long time, but the history of the valley is that during the Crusades, there were these Knights Templar, and they would go off and fight and kind of slaughter people in the name of spreading Christendom and so on. And they would come back and they would become landowners, of the community there. So the serfs, so the people who lived there would be the serfs for the knights who owned the land. And the grandfather explains how in the old days, the landowners would grow up with the serfs, and they would, know each other from childhood, and there would be a sense of, trust and kind of community there. Whereas now these landlords would be, basically people who had no sense of community there. In fact, the landlords are basically, they just see the properties as, possessions, and the people are just part of those possessions. And in 2025, reading about landlordism, especially like with a background in the UK and Ireland, it's just like, wow, this hits hard. It's like, it feels like, I don't know if it's prophetic because it seems to be a recurring thing in history, but it felt incredibly modern. It almost felt like it was written in modern time in a sort of like pastiche kind of way. And then he says, "One of the worst of them is said to have been Hans von Stoffelm from Swabia, and it was under his rule that these things are said to have happened which you want to know about and which have been passed down in our family from father to son." That sentence is such a great opener, because that is telling you, this is why I've been like going on about all these historical and societal conditions. All I'm doing is I'm telling you the ways that somebody could be really, really evil. That villain is where I'm going to start my story. Such a good opening. It reminds me of the Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg, one of my favorite Gothic novels. That also goes wild with the historical, cultural, religious background stuff in building up like a compelling villain, basically. And if you're wondering when the Black Spider is going to come into it, just hold your horses, okay? You keep wondering, because you're not going to see spiders for a little while. Now we're actually finally in the story proper, and it's like I said, there's the tyrant, there's the serfs. He doesn't treat them very well, and then finally the straw that breaks the camel's back basically is he asks them to move all these trees, to make the little shaded walkway. And when they hear this news, they realize they're not going to be able to do the crops for their, for their own families. They're going to starve, right? They're going to die. They just can't deliver on these demands unless they basically sacrifice their lives. So I love this description here. When they came to a turn in the road where they could no longer be seen from the castle, they sat down by the roadside and wept bitterly. No one had any consolation for his neighbor, and none of them had the courage for real anger, for privation and torments had extinguished their courage, so that they had no more strength left for anger, only enough for despair. Like, that's just, I love it when those folktales drop the hard truths, it's so, it just hits like how the strong treat the weak so much. You see it everywhere, and like you see it every day. But anyway, also I really love the contrast here. This works so much better because of the contrast with the framing story, which was all about like the cakes and the dresses that people were wearing and so on, right? And now suddenly we're just seeing this real deprivation, this like utter loss of everything. And also in the opening sections, there were these bits which made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, the way that they talk about the servants, right? And because I wasn't quite sure if that was the author's voice or the kind of the characters' voices, right? Where, the narrator is sort of saying, like, one had to feed the servants first, of course, and feed them abundantly, but still one was very pleased when, they were no longer in the way, and, everybody else could go on and eat and stuff. Like there's just this little sense that it's like, wouldn't it be better if we just didn't have to feed the servants? It's like, it's not said directly, but there's little hints like that all the way through, like just embedded in paragraphs and stuff. And at first I was like, but now that we're here and you see the weak being treated like this, Gotthelf is obviously really interested in class differences. All the sort of the subtle downward punches and digs of the framing device are cast in a really harsh and quite satisfying light once we get into the proper folktale. So then this huntsman appears, right, with the red feather in his cap, and he will move the trees for them. He will get them out of this pickle. All they have to do is bring the trees to a certain part of the town, and this huntsman's people will bring them the rest of the way, plant them, do all the hard work, so they'll have a chance at survival, basically. And all that the huntsman wants in return is one unchristened baby. So, next baby that's born, rather than have it christened, just send it to the huntsman. And this is where they realize the huntsman is the devil. And this is also where we realize the strongest connection with the framing story as well. That was all about being christened, and this is also all about being christened or not. So the peasants all run away, because it's the devil, right? They all run to their homes. They tell their wives what happened. First of all, the terrible news with the knight, and then, the equally terrible news that they were confronted by, Lucifer himself. And one of the wives is called Christine. Christine says, why didn't you just say no to von Stoffeln? Why didn't you tell him, we are gonna die if we do that, it's impossible, you'll lose everything because you won't have any workers to work your land, right? If I was there, I would have just said no, what's wrong with you? So loving Christine so far, right? Then they tell her about the devil, and she's like, don't tell me. You didn't even try to haggle with the devil, did you? You didn't even say okay, well, maybe we won't do that, but we could do something else. What's wrong with you people? So Christine is just absolutely legendary. So far, she is the only villager who has had a name, right? The only other character with a name is the knight, von Stoffeln. And also we get some backstory for Christine. She's the only villager with backstory at this point. And that is that she was stolen from another village or another area when the knight went warring. One of the serfs was with him, and they took her, it says. So presumably, maybe her family was killed, and presumably she was raped. And this isn't said, but we can kind of infer it that her husband at the moment is not someone who she chose to marry. I guess at that time no one chose to marry their husbands, but anyway, we also hear that she was not the sort of woman who is happy to be at home, to fulfill her duties in quietness and to care only for home and family. Christine wanted to know what was going on, and if she could not give her advice about something, it would turn out badly, or so she thought. If this was a modern novel, right, Christine would be your flawed but lovable girl boss character, main character, right, at this point. And this is also if it wasn't written by a sermonizing preacher. Anyway, up to this point, Christine is the best, right? She's just dominating the novel as far as I'm concerned. And she continues to do so because the next time the devil appears, she's actually with the group of men, and they all run away as usual, but she stays she talks to the huntsman and she actually agrees on behalf of the village to go through with the deal. Okay, we'll get you the unchristened baby, whatever, but you gotta fulfill your end of the promise so we don't all starve and die. And he says, okay. And then Christine, being Christine, is like, okay, so I guess I have to, sign my name in blood now or something like that. I'm really not looking forward to that. And the devil is like, no, it's cool. For a beautiful lady like you, just let me seal the deal with a kiss. And then he kisses her on the cheek, which I think is, quite sweet and chaste and reasonable on the side of the devil. The kiss is described in a kind of really evil and erotic way in the writing, which is also kind of sexy and fun to read. And she feels it like kind of brand her on the cheek, but she doesn't say anything about that. She goes to the men and she just tells them that she did the deal. And first of all, they're like, oh no, you can't speak on behalf of the whole village. But she says, look, guys, there's nobody who's gonna have a baby anytime soon here. Right? So I've bought us time. We have at least months before anybody's like looking like they're going to give birth in this village, right? To figure out something to do, right? And then they all talk about it and like, no, that's right. We do have a few months to figure it out. And they eventually settle on the idea that what if when the baby is born, we have a priest just christen it real fast. Christen that baby so fast that the devil can't do anything about it. And then, oh, sorry, we don't have any babies here to give you. Better wait till the next one. And then just keep on stringing him along like that. That'll buy you a bit more time and buy you a bit more time. Yeah, let's just do that. For now, we got to solve the immediate problem. Let's do what Christine says. Of course, no one's really happy about this, like they're all pretty upset. And it says that there's one woman who suddenly starts trembling and crying and sobbing uncontrollably. And remember that woman, because that trembling woman ends up being really important later on. But for now, we're just gonna park her, okay? Trembling woman in the corner. Forget about her for now, but don't totally forget about her. We're quite into the novel at this point, and given what I read on the back and the cover and everything, normally you'd think I would be upset that we didn't have a single spider or a hint of a cobweb or anything like that, because that was kind of what I was looking forward to going into this. But I am loving the moral and spiritual quandaries that this community is going through. I'm loving Christine. I'm loving the whole vibe at this point. About the 1/3 mark, about 1/3 of the way through, and at this point, it just for me starts to lose force. It feels like the kind of the narrator intruding to put in the moralizing stuff to unmuddy the waters a bit, right? Because what were these villagers meant to do, right? It's like rock in a hard place much, Also, as part of this is what happens to Christine. So basically, the trees get moved. Everyone's happy, but they're all kind of worried. The baby is born and then they christen it real fast. So, it seems like they got off the hook and everyone's relieved about that, except for Christine, because she starts to feel pain in her cheek, in the exact spot where the devil kissed her. Starts to get really sore, right? Kind of like burning, kind of like fire in her face, right? And she starts to notice a little black mark where she was kissed. And so she suffers a lot, and then the next time a baby comes along and they do the same trick, she's suffering even more. She is going through torment. She is burning, she is howling, she is trying to bring that baby to the devil, and they're just like not letting her near the baby, because at this point Christine is gone nuts, right? And there's really good horror descriptions of her just like running around the house where the baby's being born and like crawling around and screaming, and it's real like exorcist stuff, the way it's written. I was expecting her head to start spinning around and everything, and it's really interesting, because of how old it is and how modern that like kind of horror feels of what's happening to Christine. But it felt interesting. I didn't feel horrified. I didn't feel in there in the moment like I did with the earlier parts of the book, because I guess like it is maybe also making it just more conservative that Christine went from being just badass to now, okay, she's an agent of the devil, you know what I mean? It's a thing in horror where women have a kind of degree of agency and strength that they're not allowed traditionally in other genres, but they end up becoming ghosts or monsters or something like that, right? So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's got the kind of basic conservative, quite traditionalist view of gender stuff, but then through that you end up getting these really fun female characters which you wouldn't get in other genres. I'm so fascinated by that, and Christine is a prime example. So at the halfway point of the novel, there's the third baby, and the spiders show up. I wonder if some of you have guessed maybe where the first one appears. It's the black mark on Christine's face. By now it's grown, it's got like little legs, and she's like pointing it to people, and she's like, this is killing me. This is actually killing me. I think I'm gonna die. We gotta get rid of that baby. And that's the thing that's I still like about Christine at this point, is that she's not really pure evil. She's acting in, because she's being physically tormented, and like you can kind of still feel sympathy and relate to that. Like someone who is in like pure physical agony might want to do something that they wouldn't do if they were in a sane, rational place, right? Being in so much like physical suffering pushes people to do things that they wouldn't do normally, right? And so I think we still have some sympathy for her there, and I like that about that. I like that about Gotthelf. He never completely goes into that, but these are all just bad people, and it doesn't make sense why they do what they do, because they're just bad. That's why they do it, because they're bad, But anyway, she's got a black spider on her face, and at the third baby that they christen, the spider comes out of her face. A bug on my back, hang on. It's ironic, I'm trying to get a bug off my back using the cover, which has a big spider on it. So it's not ironic, it's fitting. But anyway, the spider crawls out of her face, and it is graphic, right? This was really horrifying. And then when the spider, I forget how exactly it happens, but there's more spiders. I think like the spiders come out of the spiders, or no, the spiders all come out of her face. That's right, yeah. Because it's like that American book, which I don't know if some of you read when you were young. I read in my school library, they had this like Tales to Tell in the Dark or something like that, and it was a picture book, and the pictures were all absolutely horrifying. And there was one particular story, which if you know that book, you know what I'm talking about. It was like spiders coming out of the face thing. That was just one of the scariest things to look at for me as a kid. I would sometimes like go to the library and like pick up the book and know that it was in there, and then put the book back without opening it, just to kind of like remind myself it's sealed within the covers, that terrifying picture. But yeah, this isn't a picture book, but it's, it brought back some of that trauma, I think. That's a cute bird. Anyway, yeah, loads of spiders coming out of Christine's face, right? And what do the spiders do? They bite the cows' legs. The livestock are dying, soon the people are dying. There is carnage, absolute carnage. And at this point, I still was kind of removed from it all. I think because this book is kind of talking about a community, right? It's talking not about individuals and their experiences, but it's about like a group. And I love it when books do that, actually, where we don't have characters so much as like one social character, which is like a group, right? But like it works when you zoom in sometimes. Like at the beginning, they zoomed into the godmother, and sometimes we zoomed into Christine, and like we could kind of understand this person as part of the group. But I think in the middle section, it's kind of just the group. And so like I was getting a bit bored, to be honest. Normally I like, what they say, telling and showing. I prefer telling over showing, but this was actually a bit too much telling and not enough like vivid descriptions. Like I wanted some more Bernese cakes actually at this point. The village leaders get together, kind of a subgroup, within them. And they decide we've just got to survive. We were going to die at the beginning of the book with the Lord. Now we're going to die by devil spiders, but we've got to survive. So we got to fulfill our end of the bargain. We got to get rid of this baby, right? We're not going to let it be christened. We won't tell anybody else in the village, but we're going to allow Christine to do what she's been trying to do, which is take that baby and bring it to the devil. There's a meeting spot, right, where they're supposed to bring the baby. So this is decided, and guess what? The mother of the baby that's about to be born is the trembling woman. The woman from earlier in the book who, like, when they first had all this thinking, she started like crying and trembling uncontrollably. Turns out they were like time travel trembles, because she is, this is her fate. She is the one who is going to be giving birth and losing the baby, and like somehow she knew back then, or like some sort of like, some sort of foreboding went through the past, and that is why she was so traumatized at that early point in the book. Or else maybe she was just like sad that they were dealing with the devil. I don't know. I prefer the idea of time travel trembles. But another like kind of haphazard reveal that we get at this point is that she's also Christine's sister-in-law. Sister-in-law? Yeah, because they're living in the same house together. That's right. We've got the trembling lady, and she's kind of allied with her mother-in-law, who is also Christine's mother-in-law, but the mother-in-law is like really devout, super Christian, like just you just got to pray all the time, you know. And you know, they're kind of aware that some of the villagers are circling their house like sharks while she's, you know, getting to the last stages of her pregnancy, and Christine is just like kind of smiling at her from, you know, from outside the window. And when they're in the fields, Christine's looking so happy. This is like, again, really horror book stuff, like Rosemary's Baby really shining through here. The idea that the moment you give birth, your baby is going to be stolen by the community around you that's supposed to protect you and given to Satan is just really scary. And that honing in on the characters is what makes it really good. And something that they could have made it even better, I think, is if they honed in more on the fact that these three women, the mother and Christine and the trembling lady, are all living in the same house together. Like, I just want to read a whole chapter. I want to read like a whole mini subplot about these three and like what it's like living in that house. Fortunately, it doesn't really go there, but it does like inspire the imagination, which is quite good and what made me fully invested in the book again. Now we get another kind of zoom in moment, which I really loved. And so I'm going to read you kind of a long passage, right, where the villagers are talking about the trembling lady's husband. They say, these are the village elders who've decided they're going to like get rid of the baby, right? They're going to give the baby to the devil. They were most afraid of the husband, and they were loath to use violence against him. He said he did not want to know about the business. He was willing to do as his wife asked and fetch the priest, but he agreed not to hurry about it, and what might happen in his absence was not his business. In this way, he placated his conscience. He would placate God through extra masses, and it might still be possible to do something for the poor child's soul, he thought. Perhaps the pious priest would wrest the child back from the devil, and then he and the other peasants would be out of the business. They would have done their part and at the same time still cheated the evil one. That is what the husband thought, and in any case, however matters turned, he argued, he himself would have no responsibility for the whole business, since he was not taking any active part with his own hands. That's one paragraph. Next paragraph. In this manner, the poor wife had been sold and did not know it. One of my favorite paragraph breaks I've read in a while. Like, what a slime bag. That whole passage I love so much, right? Like, it's like from the way we have that sense of like brotherhood amongst the villagers, where, you know, they're willing at this point to rip the child from a woman's arms, right? Like, and give it to the devil without her consent. But they don't want to hurt one of their bros, right? They don't want, you know, to use violence against the husband or anything like that. That would be too much, right? That's what they're most worried about. And then we move on to the spineless husband and the way he rationalizes the fact that, like, he's not actually responsible for anything, but he's finding a way to make everyone happy. God will be happy, villagers will be happy, baby will be happy because I'll do lots of masses, you know, and stuff like that. The devil will be happy, everyone's going to be happy, and I'm not going to be responsible for everything because rationally A, B, C, D, right? That's amazing. And then we have that zinger of a paragraph break where it feels like, you know, Gotthelf actually has a sort of feminist bone in his body. And interestingly enough, as we hear more about the husband, he gets a name. He's called Hans, right? So far in this novel, of the villagers, only Christine and Hans have got a name. At first I thought like the trembling woman should have gotten a name because she's more interesting as like a kind of a foil for Christine, you know, they're like kind of, you know, the trembling woman is praying all the time, and Christine is obviously now kind of, you know, the exorcist and connected to the devil and all this stuff. So I thought they'd be kind of a good, you know, dynamic duo. But actually, I think in retrospect, Hans is better to be named because there's something about, you know, like, he's so spineless and he's so engaging, and it's unexpected that he becomes like quite a strong focalized character at this point in the novel. This Hans guy who just walk in and trying to get to the priest, and oh, better get the priest because my wife is screaming and she's in labor and the baby's coming out, and okay, better go, but oh look, it's a cow, and you know, I just gotta take my time so the villagers can do their thing, right? Like, we get a lot of that. We get a lot of Hans time in this bit of him just casually walking up to the priest. And then he meets the priest, and the priest is like, I'll go. And he's like, yeah, but you know, we don't have to rush. She's exaggerating, maybe. I think Hans is just a great contrast for Christine, actually, because Christine is like, you know, the fiendish, demonic agent of Satan at this point. And Hans is real, like, banality of evil, right? Just someone who wants to please everybody and, you know, hopes that things will go well and that he doesn't have to take too much responsibility for anything, actually, right? He's the opposite of Christine, but he's also, pure evil, right? So it's actually great, I think, that those are the two villagers who have been named up to this point. I think we only get one other name, maybe, towards the end of it, who's actually a good person, in case you're wondering if any good people got names. At this point, there is another character who I really need to tell you about, and that is the priest. We've already gotten an insight into this christening priest, who he is, because at the beginning he didn't know about what was going on, but pretty soon he found out why the villagers needed him to come running every time a baby was born. Someone tells him, I forget who, maybe it's Christine, I don't remember. Someone tells him they did a deal with the devil, and if we don't get it christened ASAP, then devil's gonna take it, or someone will take it to the devil. So the priest is like, wow, that was really bad of you, but I'm gonna do my part and christen the babies, right? So he's playing along, and what happens is, at this point, when Hans is trying to get the priest to just chill and take his time, there's a huge storm. It's like beautiful pathetic fallacy. He describes storms much better than he describes dinner tables, this writer, because I don't know, I find it really difficult to describe a storm once you've gotten past a few, thunder and lightnings and dark clouds and whatever, but it's just like the sky is exploding, it's God, and God is not happy, and the priest, doesn't know what's going on, and then he clocks it okay, I should go right now to that baby. He runs, basically, even though Hans is trying to get him to chill out, and there's another guy trying to get him to chill out, but the priest gets to the spot where Christine, who has by this point burst into the house and ripped the baby from the mother's arms, and that was also just really horrible to read, by the way. It's not said directly, but you can kind of imagine it, and Christine is running to the spot with the baby. The huntsman is there, in this valley. He's there waiting with open arms. Christine's going with the baby. The priest is running down the mountain. I don't know if you've seen the 2000s movie, I think it was Van Helsing, where Van Helsing is like a kind of action hero played by Hugh Jackman. But the priest is that. The priest is just got his holy water and his cross, and he's throwing the holy water at Christine, and it burns her, and he's grabbing the baby, and he's praying and throwing the cross at Satan, and the devil is and it's like proper action. It's so over the top, it's so ridiculous. This is kind of like a gothic novel, I think, because of the melodrama, but I loved it. We deserve it at this point. We started just talking about cakes and cheese on a table, and then we've gone on a journey, and now just give us a priest fighting the devil with holy water, under a stormy sky. And this priest came from nowhere, right? He wasn't even a character for most of it. Okay, so originally I was going to end the little read through there because I thought it'd be good to end on a high note, and I was tired and the video was long. But in editing, I felt, you know what, it's just kind of mean, I think, to people who've watched this long and want some narrative closure. And there's some great stuff that happens. So I'm just going to try and power through some of the main points towards in the last third of the novel, right? So first of all, the devil legs it, right? And let's have some sympathy for the devil, to coin a phrase here, right? Because, he kept up his side of the bargain, right? He did exactly what he promised he would, and he's been teased with fresh babies, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And this third time, they've practically dangled the newborn in front of him. And then not only has he been denied it, but there's this old priest that just starts cussing him out and throwing all the Jesus juju at him, right? So the devil he's just you know what? I'm out. And I'm out of this. And he just goes straight back to hell, and that's it. He's gone. He's out of the novel. Meanwhile, Christine, under the effects of the holy water, shrivels into the black mark, the black spider on her face. And she kind of turns inside out or something, because all that's left of her is that black spider. I don't know what happened to all the other black spiders. I guess they just went with the devil straight back to hell, or maybe they just saw the new Christine spider and they're like, oh, our work here is done, we're not needed, because from now on she is the black spider. She's all, the what's it called, the titular black spider, and she begins her new reign of terror by killing Hans, killing the priest. The priest, however, after he's poisoned by her, he grabs the baby and he goes back to the town and he gets it into the arms of the trembling woman, and then he baptizes it. So the baby's soul belongs to God now. And the trembling woman is very happy about this, but then the baby, it turns out, has also been poisoned by Christine. So the baby dies. But the narrator reminds us that the important thing is that while the body goes back to the earth, the soul is in its rightful place up in heaven. Although the narrator also concedes that this isn't much this isn't much comfort to the mother at this point, as you can imagine. So where are we now? Most of our main characters have been massacred, the devil is gone, and the town is still cursed, albeit only by one black spider, but this is like the worst of all the black spiders. It just goes on this wild killing spree, and sometimes it'll disappear, and then it'll pop up in these unlikely places, like in a really kind of playful way, like under your shoe, or like while someone's having porridge, it'll just like suddenly land in the porridge or something like that. It's like some of it's almost comedic, but it's also really, you know, we get like this series of vignettes of people being killed, and there it always ends in a really horrible, painful death. And like all really good monsters, we don't really know what the black spider is at this point because of the devil's exit. You know what I mean? It does seem to have some of the powers of hell and evil in it, but it's also definitely still kind of Christine, because it starts doing things that would make sense for Christine to do. So for example, the worst and most horrible of all the deaths is given to Christine's husband, which sort of confirms, I think, my previous fan theory that like actually, yeah, the husband was not that great to her, right? Like and that she maybe wasn't very happy in that marriage. But also the what's he called, the Knights Templar, who are all up in the castle, they all get done. The landlord von Stoffeln, who hasn't been in the book, even though like he was introduced like he was the big bad and like it's all gonna be about him. No, he hasn't been in the book really. But yeah, she gets in, which is something that you feel like Christine has wanted to do for a while, right? Also, the black spider is kind of like the bubonic plague, because like it doesn't bite people so much as like whenever anyone touches it, like sometimes people try to kill it with weapons or something like that, and they all end up dying. Like the descriptions are always like, you know, fire emanated from the spider, and then they get like all these like pustules on their arms and like the bits that were like in proximity to the spider. So just the spider just has to touch, and then people's flesh starts to like kind of melt and disfigure, and they're in incredible agony and they die a really painful death. There's a lot to be said about the idea that the historical Black Plague in Europe was actually just Christine and like, you know, like going around and doing her thing, but or maybe the other black spiders, you know, from this deal that went wrong. But anyway, let's just park all that and continue with the story. Another thing that makes it kind of more Christine-ish is the fact that the black spider has been in basically every single house in the village except for the place where Christine used to live, and where the Trembling Lady still lives with her mother-in-law and her 2 children, which I didn't remember being mentioned before, but she does have 2 very much alive children, and she's very worried about those children. And we don't know if the reason that the Demon Christine spider doesn't come back to the house is because of any lingering humanity, or because she's kind of scared of the place or whatever, but for whatever reason she avoids that house until kind of the end of her massacre. So the Trembling Lady is worried for her children, and she thinks, nobody can kill this thing, but if I can't kill it, maybe I can trap it. So what she does is she gets a piece of wood in the house, and she bores a hole into it, and then she puts like loads of holy water and blessings all over it, which, you know, to me just sounds like Trembling Lady's doing inverse witchcraft at this point, and I'm, you know, totally here for that. Like, power to her, right? Because finally she has something to do in this story, which isn't just give birth or be very sad at home. And yeah, I think like it's very clear that she is the, you know, the ideal of womanhood for the narrator, right? And so it's very telling that like her main role is to, you know, be involved with kids and to be very sad and to never leave the house. Unlike Christine, who is, you know, out in the world and slaughtering like the strong, independent spider she is. So now the Trembling Lady is waiting for the spider to turn up, and one night she falls asleep, and suddenly the priest, who I still imagine is being played by Hugh Jackman, right? The action hero priest appears to her in a dream. There's like, wake up, spider in the house. So she wakes up, and lo and behold, there is the black spider itself crawling up towards her little kitties. So in a nice inverse of what happened before with the baby snatching scene, now the Trembling Lady grabs her old sister-in-law, Christine, and, you know, feels the pains of death like shooting up her arm. But, you know, with the strength of God, she is able to shove that spider into the hole, close it with the magic peg, and that's it. It can't get out. There's like a kind of a roar, and the wood is blackened and evil, but the spider can't get out. And then the Trembling Lady dies. I was almost surprised but quite satisfied that she died, because like yeah, everybody else has died. Part of me thought God was going to save her or something like that, but like, this story doesn't go that saccharine. It's like it's pretty brutal in a way that I find, I don't know if fair is the right word, but like it's true to its purpose, let's say. And so now the grandfather who has been telling this story winds it up with a truly excellent twist, which is that this black post, which contains the spider inside of it, has been kept throughout the ages. And as the centuries passed and the house, like fell into ruin and got taken down, demolished and rebuilt, always this black post was kept and worked back into the architecture, because apparently bottling up all the powers of hell makes for a very strong preservative, right? It's a sturdy piece of wood. So everyone at the christening is now freaking out. The godmother is like clawing at her back because, throughout the whole breakfast, she'd been leaning against the black post, right? And they're just like looking around and they can't bear to look at the house because they're worried the black spider is just going to jump out a window, or maybe it's in the grass, and the vibe is ruined. And I love this reminder that and what's supposed to be a really happy occasion, this old guy has just been telling like the most unsettling blood-soaked story. And honestly, that is just real granddad behavior, isn't it? They all go to eat their dinner, right? Which has gone cold, much like the atmosphere, and everyone is in a terrible mood and super jumpy, and they can't enjoy their Bernese cakes and cheeses, and who can blame them, right? The grandmother starts chastising the grandfather for bringing down the whole mood, right? And he decides to make amends for spoiling the party, and he does that in the only way he knows how, by telling another story about the black spider. And you'd expect some people would want to leave at this point, right? Because they're also traumatized, but at the same time, they do want to know why he and his ancestors have always kept this black post there, and if the spider has really been there the whole time. And the second story is really good because it deals with the descendants of the trembling lady. It's set like 200 years after the events of the first story, and those descendants are presumably also the ancestors of the grandfather. So now we've got this family saga out of the blue, right, which I'm all here for because I'm a real sucker for bloodlines. And it's also really good because it really deepens and complicates Gotthelf's theme of how do we live with evil in the world, right? In this case, it's the black spider in the house, in the post, right? And that is I think quite important for the novel as a whole. But narratively speaking, the characters and the situations, it can't live up to what has come before, all the mad shenanigans we've just read. So I will end my retelling of the black spider here, and I encourage all of you to go and pick it up if you want to find out the second of the grandfather's party spoiling stories. I will read you the last line, because the last line I found really chilling and also made me see everything in a totally different light. It says, "But what power the spider has when men's spirits change is known only to him who knows everything and allots his strength to each and all, to spiders and to mankind." Well, it works better in context, I guess, but basically I was like, wait a minute, was God the spider? Is this the Scooby-Doo mask off moment where they pull off the black spider mask and it was God all along? It just kind of it made me really creeped out, and it made me, it makes you kind of question the whole good-bad dichotomy, and it's actually there all the way through. I think there's different ways to interpret that last line, obviously, but the idea that part of what the black spider is, there's all these hints that it's not just Christine, it's not just Satan, it is something which is part of something bigger and beyond us, and that got me thinking a lot about the book of Job in the Bible. So now we'll cut to the past footage where I talk a little bit about that and wrap up this massive video. The book of Job is basically God and the devil make a bet. The devil says this guy Job, right? He's so good and you love him so much and he's such a perfect guy and he's always praying to God and all this stuff. That's because he has, power, wealth, comfort, right? He's got a good life. If I could torture him, give me a month or something, just let me torture this guy, let me take everything from him, and he will stop, being a good Christian. He will stop believing in you. He will stop caring for you. He will stop worshiping you, right? And God's yeah, take your best shot at him, right? So God basically, I imagine the devil be what, really? And God's yeah, go for it. I won't stop you. We'll see. God makes this bet, and he lets the devil torture Job, and the devil takes everything from Job, and God lets it happen. And then Job, like the devil said, starts to lose it, and he's like, he's lost his family, he's lost his friends, and like also in this book, it's so unfair. Like, babies die. Babies get bitten by the spiders and they die, right? The spiders kill babies. The spiders kill animals. Loads of innocent things that couldn't have had anything to do with the deal with the devil die. Job says in the Bible, like, what's the deal with this? What is the point in God? If God lets this happen, even if Satan is the one doing it, it's basically Satan and God working together, right? So what is the point in worshiping God if all these terrible, monstrous things can happen to me, but also just in the world in general? Like, I would give God a chance. If he would just come and explain himself to me. It is, murky and angry and violent, what happens, and that's like what the atmosphere of this whole book is, like morally, like confused and strange. And like I've seen some people and some of like the reviews on Storygraph saying like, this book, like, it just shows how stupid Christianity is, like, and like, did he even mean to show like all the contradictions because God is blah 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 blah? And like, I'm sure this guy knew what he was talking about, right? Like, this is like crystallizing and making like really fun a lot of that murky, difficult, like unpleasantness from Job. But yeah, in the Old Testament, God comes down to Job and he doesn't explain himself. He says, would you pull up Leviathan with a fishing hook? Would you like try and like make me, God, the unknowable, like explain myself to you, a mere mortal? There is just something beyond you. There is something greater than you can understand. My wisdom, my goodness is something you just have to believe in, right? You can't know everything. You can't find justice for everything. You just have to have faith, and then eventually good things might happen, okay? And then he gives him some good things, right? So Gotthelf is different because Gotthelf asks those questions, but his God is the New Testament God. He asks the questions of Old Testament Job, and then he answers them with the New Testament God, which is like more about compassion, more about like, if you're good and you sacrifice yourself to the spiders, then you will hear the trumpets, you will see the light, you will hear the gates opening as the pain is taken from you and you go on into the next life. It's like there is a sort of like compassionate, loving answer to be given. Whereas the Old Testament God is not about compassion and love at all, right? So I feel like Gotthelf really wanted to, in a way, rewrite some of the questions of the book of Job, but then answer them using the New Testament God. Like, I find that such a fascinating project, and all the more so because he did it with a creepy story about spiders in a village, that's like told by an old grandpa, like while people are waiting for lunch or something. So anyway, that is my final take on this. If it sounded interesting to you, I'm happy. If it was entertaining to hear this long rambly story. This time I can say that all the rambling that you just had to endure isn't just me and my kind of inability to sort of like tell a story really straight, but that is what this book is a lot. It's quite rambly, but that is why I like it so much. Still, maybe I mean anything that touches me like this did, I give 5 stars on Goodreads, but it's not like, it does get held back, like I said, like by some sexism, by some of that authoritarianism which is inherent in the traditional stuff when it comes to religion and when it comes to preachiness, but like I thought it was worth it. Some people won't be able to get past that, and that is fine, but if you feel like reading it, then go for it. It's also not so famous, I think, as a classic. I want people to discover the joys of the Black Spider. Apparently this is his best book. I don't know if I feel like I want to go seek out the other things that he wrote. I kind of feel like I don't need to. I feel like I got it all here, but who knows, maybe one day. Anyway, thank you for watching this long and rambly video, and I'll catch you in the next one, hopefully before too long. Bye bye. And I know what you're thinking, well maybe, but like that would be something that often... Waidson, por favor. Por favor, Waidson.